Picture this, a sea of terrified women, captured after a brutal Mongol siege, facing the unstoppable power of Genghis Khan. Some would be taken as concubines, others handed out to loyal warriors as trophies of conquest. In the world of the Great Khan, women became both symbols of victory and pawns in a ruthless empire-building machine. For the men who faced Genghis Khan's armies, the choice was often brutally simple: victory or a swift death. Their story usually ended on the battlefield. But for the tens of thousands of women left in the smoldering ruins of their cities, the end of the battle was just the beginning of their nightmare. Theirs is a story not of a quick end, but of a terrifying new existence defined by violence and uncertainty. And yet, for a select few, it was also a story of an astonishing and completely unexpected rise to power. This is the untold story of the women who fell into the shadow of the conqueror. Imagine the sound. Not the clash of swords or the cries of soldiers, but the silence that follows. The eerie, heavy silence after your city walls have been breached and the Mongol horde has swept through. For the women who survived the initial slaughter, this silence was filled with a suffocating dread. The Mongol war machine was notoriously efficient, not just in battle, but in its aftermath. Once a city fell, a chillingly organized process often began. The population would be driven out into the fields beyond the city walls. Here, a great sorting took place. Artisans and engineers, men with skills the empire could use, were frequently spared and sent to the Mongol heartland. The remaining men were often massacred to prevent any future resistance. But the women and children were seen as a different kind of spoil, a primary object of the conquest itself. They were a resource to be collected. For these women, it was a moment of pure terror. They were lined up, evaluated, and divided up like property. Beauty, youth, and aristocratic bearing could be both a curse and a blessing. The most beautiful were often claimed by the Khan's commanders and elite warriors. Those of high birth, the daughters and wives of defeated kings and chieftains, were set aside for a different, but no less harrowing, fate. The rest were herded together, their futures hanging by a thread, now the property of the soldiers who had just destroyed their world. So what happened to these women? Their paths diverged into a spectrum of brutal realities. The vast majority were given to Mongol soldiers as a reward for their service. They became slaves, forced into domestic and sexual servitude, their lives entirely at the whim of their new masters. The dehumanization was absolute. They were treated as trophies of war, a symbol of a man's prowess in battle. Many were forced to march for hundreds, even thousands of miles with the army, and those who couldn't keep up were simply left to die. Women with specialized skills, like weavers or musicians, might find themselves relocated to the Mongol capital of Karakorum, but not as guests. They were living gifts, forced to serve the Mongol court. For the most prized women, those of exceptional beauty or noble lineage, their fate was to enter the harems of Genghis Khan himself or his sons, destined to become concubines or secondary wives. This process was a cornerstone of Mongol conquest. By taking the women of their enemies, the Mongols didn't just reward their soldiers, they systematically dismantled the social fabric of the conquered people. They shattered families and erased bloodlines, ensuring that the defeated culture could never rise again from its ashes. But to truly understand the complexity of this, we have to look at how the Mongols treated their own women. And this is where the story gets incredibly complicated. While captured women were subjected to horrific treatment, women born into Mongol society, especially the elite, enjoyed a level of freedom and authority almost unheard of in the 13th century. Mongol women could own and inherit property. They could ride horses and were crucial in managing the vast nomadic households, which were complex economic engines. Most strikingly, they held real political power. They could participate in the Kurultai, the great councils where new Khans were elected, and in the absence of their husbands, they could rule. The wives of the Khan weren't just consorts, they were rulers of their own courts, known as ordis, managing vast territories and wealth. Some scholars point to the Asa, Genghis Khan's legal code, noting it had provisions against the mistreatment of women within Mongol society. However, our knowledge of the Asa is incomplete, as no full copy survives, and these protections absolutely did not extend to captives. So how could a society that granted its own women such authority treat captured women with such systematic brutality? The answer lies in the clear, sharp line the Mongols drew between us and them. To the Mongols, their own women were the bedrock of their nation. Captured women were part of the spoils of war, symbols of an enemy's ultimate defeat. In their minds, there was no contradiction. But this rigid system, designed to subjugate, occasionally produced a result that no one could have predicted. It's these complex and often contradictory stories that make history so fascinating, don't you think? They challenge our simple narratives and force us to look deeper. If you agree, and you want to keep exploring the hidden corners of the past, make sure you're subscribed and have hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next investigation. For 99% of captured women, their story ends in servitude or an early grave. But for an exceptionally small and fortunate few, capture wasn't the end. It was the beginning of an improbable climb to the highest levels of power. This path was almost exclusively open to women of high birth who were taken as wives by Mongol nobility. A royal captive, married to one of Genghis Khan's sons, could become the mother of a future ruler. And in the Mongol Empire, the mother of a Khan held immense influence. However, no story is more shocking or illustrates this better than that of Toragine Khatan. Toragine wasn't a Mongol. She was born into the Naiman tribe, a rival group conquered by Genghis Khan. Her first husband was a prince of the Merkits, another enemy tribe. After the Merkits were defeated in 1204, she was captured. As was his custom with high-ranking captives, Genghis Khan gave her as a wife to his third son and designated heir, Ogdi. For years, she was simply one of his wives. But she was intelligent and politically savvy, giving birth to 5 sons and gradually building her influence at court. When Ogdi Khan died in 1241, the Mongol Empire was thrown into uncertainty. But Toragine saw her chance. Through masterful political maneuvering, she had her husband's chosen ministers dismissed and installed her own allies, including another female captive named Fatima. In the spring of 1242, she managed to have herself declared the Great Khatan, the region of the entire Mongol Empire. A captured woman now ruled the largest land empire the world had ever seen. For 5 years, she held absolute power, steering the course of the empire until she could ensure the election of her own son, Gayuk, as the next great Khan. Toragine's story is a stunning anomaly, a testament to the fact that even in a system designed for subjugation, immense personal ambition could, on the rarest of occasions, turn a captive into a queen. To really understand the story of Genghis Khan and captured women, we have to go back to the beginning, to a single traumatic event that shaped the man himself. Long before he was the Great Khan, when he was just a young chieftain named Temujin, his own wife, Borte, was violently kidnapped. Shortly after their marriage, a rival tribe, the Merkits, raided their camp in an act of revenge. Temujin managed to escape, but Borte was taken. The historical accounts say Temujin was utterly devastated, remarking that his bed was made empty and his breast was torn apart. This wasn't just a political problem, it was a deep, personal wound. For 8 agonizing months, Borte was held captive and forced to be the wife of one of her captors. Refusing to accept her loss, Temujin rallied his allies for a daring rescue mission. Many historians consider the successful recovery of Borte to be the key event that set him on his path to becoming a conqueror. It was his first major victory, solidifying his leadership and fueling his ambition. Shortly after her rescue, Borte gave birth to her first son, Joki. His paternity was forever clouded by doubt, but Temujin always claimed the boy as his own. You have to wonder, how did this searing personal experience shape his worldview? Some historians speculate that the pain and humiliation of his wife's capture fueled a belief that men who couldn't protect their women were unworthy of power, and that their women were therefore forfeit. We can never know for sure, but the shadow of Borte's abduction looms large over the fate of every woman his armies would later capture. The story of women captured by Genghis Khan isn't one story, but thousands. It's a narrative of immense suffering and exploitation, a brutal reflection of the realities of 13th century warfare. The vast majority of these women were swept away by the tide of conquest, their names and stories lost to history, their lives reduced to a footnote of servitude. They were the human cost of empire. Yet, within this darkness, there are flashes of unbelievable light. The stories of women like Jean Khatun defy all expectations, proving that even within a system of violent subjugation, a rare few could seize power and rule nations. And at the heart of it all is the personal trauma of the conqueror himself, a man whose fierce love for his own captured wife may have inspired the very policies that brought misery to so many others. Their legacy is a powerful reminder that history is never simple. It's a complex, contradictory, and deeply human tapestry, woven from threads of both unimaginable cruelty and incredible resilience.